Welcome back, guys. Thanks for checking out the channel. Today I wanted to do something special and talk about the Holy Trinity. So if you're not familiar with the Holy Trinity, this term came around in the knife world in the mid-2000s, and it referred to the three brands of Strider, CRK, Chris Reeve Knives, and Hinderer Knives. So the Holy Trinity was kind of the pinnacle of collecting in that era, of collecting full custom, obviously. Full custom knives have been around for a really long time. But each one of these brands earned their spot in the Holy Trinity over another brand for a very specific reason. And in order to understand that, we have to talk a little bit about knife eras first, because the Holy Trinity was really responsible for introducing the current era of knives that we are in, and the things they contributed when they were known as the Holy Trinity are directly related to some sort of thing that is very popular in today's era of knives. So let's talk about eras of knives just real fast and kind of the introduction of eras of knives. First era of knives, obviously ever, was the fixed blade, known as just a knife. We've been making knives since we climbed down from trees or came from the garden, whatever you believe. And we've been making knives since then. They've always been a tool for humans. Next era of knives was kind of the simple slip joint that our parents and grandparents carried, and also many of us carried. My first knife was a Swiss Army knife, which is a slip joint. This is a Northwood Spare Lake. Love this knife. Carried this on my wedding day. Very classy. Oh, also this fixed blade. Rainier Knives, made right here in Washington. LMAX. This is my the base camp is the name of the knife, and this is my hunting knife. Okay, so those were kind of the two early eras of knives. Then we come into the era of, EDC knives, if you will, kind of the crazy era of knives that we are in today. But this era of knives has been split, where EDC knives started when these were the Holy Trinity. I mean, obviously the 90s, we saw the emergence of these cool American companies making like Emerson and Chris Reeve and Strider and Mint and Buck being kind of American-made EDC knives. But these kind of were the ushering of the modern era of knives from the previous era of knives, and for specific reasons for each brand. And I'm going to talk about those reasons. So first, let's start by talking about Chris Reeve Knives. How did Chris Reeve Knives earn its spot in the Holy Trinity? Well, quite simply put, fit and finish. Obviously, I can't talk about Chris Reeve without mentioning that also Chris Reeve was the one that invented the frame lock, is known originally as the Reeves integral lock. So obviously that is a huge contribution to the world of EDC knives today and pocket knives today. But we're not going to talk about that. That's a locking mechanism. Obviously, that just shows his genius. But the thing that they contributed in the mid-2000s to early 2010s was fit and finish. Chris Reeve knives in that era were the absolute best of the best. You could not find a knife that was as perfect as a Chris Reeve. Most knives had a lot more kind of, you had to fiddle with them a little bit to get them just right. You had to tighten and loosen the pivot maybe. Maybe you had a little bit of blade play, or the knife wasn't perfectly centered, etc. But these guys were absolutely perfect. And every time you took them apart and put them back together, they were still perfect. That is what they contributed. That was how they earned their spot. You would get one of these in hand and your jaw would drop. These were better than 99% of stuff on market. Now, honestly, a lot of the companies have figured out fit and finish. You can get knives with better fit and finish than a CRK. Not a lot better, because it's still pretty amazing. I mean, you can see how perfectly that blade fits and all this stuff. The action is glassy smooth. You're not on bearings, obviously. You're on washers, so you're not going to get that flipping out action. But in general, that is what CRK contributed to that era. Okay, next we are going to talk about my favorite of the Holy Trinity, and that is Strider. The way they earned their position in the Holy Trinity was through two things. First off, ergonomics. So let's talk about ergonomics of the Strider. The Strider, in my opinion, is still one of the best knives in hand. Today, with many knives, we are getting excellent ergonomics. And honestly, I love that that's been a big focus in the pocket knife world as of the last few years. You have the Rosie, the Arius, just to name a few of those ergonomic juggernauts. But those knives really got their start from the Strider. I'm not saying they copied the Strider, but Strider was the first one to do a hand-filling, absolute, like, perfect knife for the hand. Still one of my favorite knives in hand, maybe my favorite. It featured this kind of funky heel here that dug right into your palm. Honestly, incredible. That is one of the things they contributed to the modern pocket knife, which you see hugely today, is a focus on ergonomics. The other thing that they contributed to the modern pocket knife is blade steel. So believe it or not, the world was never as crazy as it is in blade steel. For a while there, people just kind of had blade steels. Blade steel was not as important as it is today. I think that blade steel is a little bit too focused on in today's market. I mean, are most of us really using blades to their potential? No, definitely not. I think that we should be happier with we shouldn't be so crazy about blade steel. That being said, I understand the coolness of metallurgy and all that stuff, but Strider has done crazy blade steels forever. They love working with different blade steels, so you can find Striders with every blade steel you've ever heard of and every blade steel you've never heard of. Example, this is in CTS XHP, which is a pretty classic blade steel. This one is in Magna Cut, which is the hot blade steel. The one I have in my pocket right now, which is a custom but still a Strider, is in D2. So they really aren't afraid of the blade steel, which is something you see today absolutely. Everything is either Magna Cut, M390, K390, Crewwear, whatever. But the blade steel hype kind of was started by Strider in some ways because they were doing crazy things with blade steel. And that is one of the reasons that they earned their spot in the Holy Trinity in that era. Now, lastly, of the Holy Trinity, we have to talk about Hinderer Knives. Now, Hinderer Knives are pretty interesting because it's harder to pinpoint what got Hinderer into the Holy Trinity. There's a couple kind of more theories I have. Obviously, all of these things I'm saying are based in facts, but my opinion, of course, because the Holy Trinity itself is a colloquialism, and saying where colloquialism comes from is a little bit difficult. Obviously, the colloquialism of Holy Trinity comes from biblical terms, but why these being the Holy Trinity, these are my opinions and the research I've done. But Hinderer is a little bit harder to lock down why it's part of the Holy Trinity. There's a few things that kind of make it fit there, but Hinderer is definitely the youngest of the three of the Holy Trinity. They've been around the shorter amount of time. I believe they came into business in the early 2000s as opposed to Strider and CRK coming into business in the early 90s. But Hinderer kind of took some of the things that Strider and Chris Reeve were doing, and they consolidated it into the prototype of today's EDC knife. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that these knives kind of are a picture of what most EDC knives look like today. They have multiple deployment methods. They have swappable scales. They have different types of steels sometimes. That's a little other conversation. But they do use the modern steels. They're on bearings. Their action is solid. It's not hydraulic like both the Strider and the CRK, which are on washers. So they kind of took the influences of what CRK and Strider were doing and made it into a singular package. They also have great ergonomics. They're very pocket friendly. Really, they are the template of what a modern EDC knife looks like. I think the one thing that Hinderer really contributed was more of the multiple opening methods. You didn't see that a ton in the era that these three brands were really at their peak, which is pretty interesting. But they now, everything and their sister has like 4 opening methods. I think Hinderer is an example of taking good things that other American companies were doing, like CRK and Strider, and kind of consolidating it into an EDC knife as opposed to a knife with a specific tool purpose. I mean, arguably, of course, the SNG and the Umnumzon are very much EDC friendly knives, blah, blah, blah. but there is a little bit more of an approachability, a general approachability with the like XM18 or even the Eclipse when it comes to EDC. So I would say that their contribution to being part of the Holy Trinity was being focused on the everyman's carry, if that makes sense. So we can't finish talking about this without talking about where these knives exist in today's modern era, right? Are they still worth it? Well, I would say yes. There's a lot of, talks about something I hear all the time is like, oh, well, why would I pay that price for that knife when I could get something equal made in China? Well, first of all, if the Chinese knives speak to you enough that you're happy with just collecting them, go for it. Honestly, it's cheaper, and if they scratch the itch for you, go for it. But if you consider yourself really a knife collector, you owe it to yourself to try the 3 of the Holy Trinity at least once. There is something special about each one of these knives. They all have a very specific feel. They all feel different in the hand. They all accomplish different things, and they are special. They really are. I own these 4 knives are mine. I have more Striders. I only have these 2. Chris Reeve. These are from a buddy who's lending them to me right now, and I very much appreciate that. I truly love both these knives and all of my Striders. You saw my custom Strider that's in my pocket right now. I've been carrying that almost exclusively. They all speak to you differently. They have a quality handmade feel that is different than the quality manufactured feel that the high-end overseas manufacturers are doing. I would say they are still relevant today if you are willing to look at a knife for more than the sum of its parts, but rather the sum of its craftsmanship. So those are my thoughts on the Holy Trinity. I wanted to just talk about the Holy Trinity for, however many minutes this has been. It's a really important thing in the knife world to understand, like why they were known as the Holy Trinity. And I started collecting in the era where these were the best knives you could really have. And now we're in a place where I feel like there's a million different manufacturers and everybody claims different things, but these were definitively the best American-made knives you could have in that era, and they are very important to me as a collector because of my collector journey started then. So I want to talk a little bit about why those things were what they were, just to clarify some things and just to, speak about my opinions on each of these individual knives. They're all excellent. You should try CRK, you should try Strider, and you should absolutely try Hinderer as well. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this rambly video. I enjoyed making it. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I hope you have a great day. We'll catch you in the next one.